All right, so we're gonna review how to do the EBQ and the AAQ. We've done a couple AAQs in class, one EBQ, and we didn't even really go over it. It took me so long to grade it that by the time I graded, I was like, we'll just wait till we do AP review. So a reminder that on the AP exam, there are 2 free response questions. You have a total of 70 minutes to do them. The time is not divided up, so you could spend 10 minutes on one and an hour on the other. It's up to you how you divide the time, but it's recommended that you do 25 minutes and 45 minutes. And I don't think they will give you those time announcements. You'd need to kind of pay attention to those times on your own. Other things, the multiple choice counts as 2/3 and the FRQs count as 1/3 of the overall grade. And each of the FRQs, the AAQ, the EBQ, they count equally. So even though one of them is longer, the EBQ is longer, they count the same. And on both of them, your goal is to earn up to 7 points. We talked about, for those who took the mock exam, that if you got about 40 of the 75 multiple choice and about 3 on each of the FRQs, on that test, that was about the minimum to get a 3. So that's probably a pretty close guess, is that if you can get, 40 is, you can miss a lot of questions to get 40 out of 75, and you can probably get more than 3 out of 7 on the FRQs. So you all have a very strong chance of doing well enough to make 3s for sure, and even 4s and 5s. All right, so I'm going to start with reviewing EBQ and then AAQ. And we're not really going to go through an actual one, but I'm just going to give you all the pointers because you have seen them before at this point. I'm just giving you all the refreshers. And some of this is tips that I've learned that are probably better than when I first taught it. So on the EBQ, a reminder that that is the one where they give you 3 studies and you have to form, actually, let me show you the other one first. I decided that I like how the other one describes it first better. So look at this one here. It's kind of like dark shadowy on your paper because it was color printed. All right, so the evidence-based question, there are 3 sources, 7 possible points, and that is 16.6% of your total score. So you're going to read all 3, and then you have to make a claim. So this one calls it the Sarah era, I guess that's Sarah, I don't know. But I kind of like how they broke it up. So the first thing you have to do is propose a claim that is relevant to the question. The sample one that you all did was about what time they should start school. I think that was the EBQ. Yeah, that was the EBQ. And you had to use the sources to say they should start school at 10 o'clock or later. And so that's your claim. So then you have to find 2 pieces of evidence from the article. The evidence should be your easiest point. Your evidence should be something that as long as you cite it correctly, you get it. So the evidence needs to somehow relate to your claim, and you have to cite it correctly, meaning put it in quotation marks or summarize it and then write source 1 or source 2, or I don't remember if they call them ABC, but write that in parentheses. So you need to pick something that kind of relates to your claim and then correctly cite it. Then you have to give reasoning. So you're going to explain the relationship between the evidence that you picked and your claim. So that's 1 point. And then another point right here, the application, that's probably the hardest part, is where you have to pick a psych concept that we have learned about this year and talk about how that relates to your evidence. And then you do all that again with a second piece of evidence. Remember, that has to come from a different source than the first one. And then there's a third source that you won't use. But you pick a second source, you pick another piece of evidence that supports your claim, and then you do another application. A reminder that whatever psych concept, perspective theory you write about cannot be in the reading. So if they're talking about the hippocampus, you can't use hippocampus as your application. You got to use something else, pull something else out of your brain. Now, if you're like, I can't think of anything, remember that you could get all the other ones would be 5 points out of 7. So if you can't remember an application, it's okay. You could still try to get all the other points. College Board has also said it is possible, even if you screw up your claim, which it's a little bit difficult to picture or describe how that could happen, but that doesn't mean that your whole essay is thrown out. It's possible to have a poorly worded claim, but like we know what you meant, but you didn't state it very clearly, but then you still have evidence and support. So I haven't been trained on how to grade that yet, but apparently that's a thing. So let me see. I'll come back to the other half of that. So we'll look at the back of that in a minute, but we'll go back to this other EBQ one. So same thing here, claim, but this one gives you how to word it. So when you do your practice EBQ on Thursday, it is okay to use these papers. So I'm going to say that when you're doing your practice ones in class, hopefully you'll be in class, you'll be able to do them, or else you'll be hopefully in a quiet corner in the cafeteria doing them, or the lecture hall, or wherever you are. It is okay to use the formatting, but try not to just Google your whole thing, because that's not practice. But if you're using the format for practice, that's okay. And then come back in later another day to do a full practice. Yes? When you're forming that first sentence, the claim sentence, the effect of blank on blank is, that would be a good format to use. So the effect of sleep, or the effect of waking up later and starting school at 10 a.m. on school performance is good. So they should start school. That one wasn't even a great example for that. But you're making a clear statement. They should do this or whatever based on your information. And then again, there's two pieces of evidence, then the apply and reasoning. All right, so there's all that. All right, questions about the AA or EBQ. Let's talk about the AAQ. There we go. All right, so AAQ again, that's the shorter one. You don't want to spend more than like 30 minutes, maybe more like 25 minutes. You're going to have one research article. This is the one where you have to say which research method, and the other paper that you have there is going to help with that. So you have to accurately identify the research method, and you only have 5 options. We'll go over those 5 options again here and keywords to look for in just a minute. Then you have to state a measurable or quantifiable definition of, you have to give an operational definition, and we'll look at that. I didn't put together a whole practice thing today, but we will do practice on operational definitions before the test. But you're going to have to say how you measure stuff, and we'll talk about it a little bit more in a minute. You have to do a statistical interpretation. So there are a few options on statistics, and I didn't make a list today, but I'll try to make a list whenever we practice these again. But things like, what does the mean mean? What is median, mode, range, standard deviation, statistical significance, range, did I already say that? Normal distribution. Those are statistical things they could ask you about, and you have to say, what do they mean in relation to this study? Ethical guidelines is probably the easiest one for you to pick out, but the key thing is, and it's written right here, you have to find it in the source. You can't be like, oh, they didn't talk about debriefing, so maybe they didn't debrief. You cannot make inferences. You don't assume that if they didn't write about it, that it didn't happen. Instead, write about what they did do. They got informed consent. They got their permission. They kept their identities anonymous. They made sure that they were not facing too much stress. So say, what did they do? Or if it clearly says they didn't do it, you could write about that too. But I think mostly they'll want you to say what they did do. A lot of them, the ones we've seen so far, have been about consent. So only one. You only need to do one. It says accurately identify at least one. All right, generalizability. Remember, generalizability means, are you able to relate what is studied here to a broader population? So you have to say 2 things. 1, yes or no, can you generalize it? And 2, why or why not? So, and when we look at the other paper that you have here next, we'll talk about examples on how to word that and what to look for. And then the last one is worth up to 2 points, argumentation. Use a specific, this is kind of like what you're doing in the EBQ. You're using a specific result from the study, so you're getting evidence, and then you have to explain how those results support or refute the hypothesis. So this is like the other one, except you don't have to do it as a psych concept. You're relating it to what they put in the writing. So you're saying I'll come back to an example of that looking at the other paper. So let's look at the third paper you have. It doesn't have any color on it. It's the white one, and it has, I think it's this one. this one. AAQ sentence starters. All of these, I didn't say I did not make. I'm part of a really good Facebook group, and they share all their stuff. So this one I would have out tomorrow while you're doing the practice AAQ. So first thing you have to do is, a couple of random details. Don't directly contradict yourself. Don't make the reader mad at you by like not writing. Actually, I mean, they'll make you put it in separate boxes. I don't really know how you could make the reader mad at you. And usually it was a handwriting thing before. But anyways, don't bury your answer in a lot of sentences. Sometimes one sentence will be enough. Don't ever write just one word. Write at least a short sentence. All right, so the first one, identify the research method used in the study. So you would say the research method is blank. That's your whole sentence. You don't have to say because blah, 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 blah. You don't have to do any of that. But you do need to say one of these 5 things. If you want to take some notes right here, you can do this. We've talked about them before, but you might add the notes again. All right. If it's an experiment, what are key words that are going to tell you it's an experiment? Random assignment. So random assignment is our number 1 key phrase that tells us it's an experiment. What are they randomly being assigned to? Experimental or control group. So if you see those phrases, experimental or control group, that's usually an indicator that it's an experiment. Sometimes if you see they manipulated this drug or they manipulated something, that's another indication of an experiment. All right. Case study. There's not really key words, but you would say it would be a unique or rare group. And it's going to be lots of information, lots of different information. So because a meta-analysis could have a lot of information, but it's all going to be similar. So a case study, they could have gathered interviews. They could have gathered brain studies. They could have gathered survey data. They could have done personality testing and intelligence testing, all about serial killers. So it's a small group of people. So it's a rare, unique group of people, and they've gathered a variety of different information. So that's our case study. Usually there that it's some kind of unique group. Meta-analysis is it's going to be multiple studies that were similar. So all these other studies, but they were very similar. They could have been experiments. They could have been surveys. They could have been intelligence tests, whatever it was they did. There's a bunch of them, and now they're comparing them. So multiple of something, multiple research. Correlation, what's our keyword in correlation? It's in the word. Relationship. So we're looking at, or correlate to. Sometimes they say it, but the keyword is relationship. So sometimes they will say there was a positive or a negative relationship. But you have to be careful because there could be relationships in experiments too, because they might be looking at the relationship between taking a drug and your depression levels. But so it could look like experiment, except it won't say random assignment. So, but in general, correlation is looking at the relationships between variables, how one influences the other, and it's not an experiment. Naturalistic observation, watching people or animals in their natural setting. They're unaware. Sometimes a person is mixed in. So let's say you have factory workers. There could be a researcher who's working among them, who's studying them. That could be considered a naturalistic observation. They're not necessarily just sitting there with a notebook, but they're mixed in with the group, and while they're working with them, they maybe make observations. Question?
So if it's a naturalistic observation, can you say, since the experiment was a naturalistic observation, this is not ethical because they didn't get consent?
The question was, so if it's a naturalistic observation and they didn't get consent, you could say that. But you wouldn't if they, okay, so if they specifically said they did not get consent in the article, then yeah, you could say this is unethical because it said they did not get consent. But if they just leave that part out, you can't assume that they didn't. So don't use that. So again, pick what they write about, what is actually in there. All right, any questions on the research methods? Let me show you that acronym again that we made up, or somebody else made up. It's loading slowly. Mary never eats cotton candy. So meta-analysis, naturalistic observation, experiment, correlation, case study. So those are your only 5 options. on the AP exam, I've always told my students this, for some people, what works really well when you start the test is to do a brain dump. A brain dump is as soon as they say start, you put all the things that you're scared you're going to forget and you write them on the scratch paper real quick. So if you're worried that you're going to forget retrograde and anterograde or proactive and retroactive interference, keep saying it to yourself before the test starts, and as soon as the test starts, dump it on the paper. If you're worried you're going to forget these, put Mary never eats cotton candy, write that on your paper as soon as you start. You can't do it before you start, but once you start, dump it on your paper. It's a brain dump, then you have the notes there, and then when you get to it, like, okay, it's there, I remember it now. So sometimes that helps, and especially this acronym for the AAQ would help for that. All right. Something that we did talk about earlier that is different from what I understand now, from what I've learned. On our earlier ones, we had longitudinal and cross-sectional as options. And in College Board's most recent videos, these are the only 5 they say. So cross-sectional and longitudinal could be types of studies. It could have been a longitudinal case study. It could have been a cross-sectional case study. You do not have to say that. They may use those words in the article, but you don't have to say that. So you just have to say it's one of these 5 things. You don't have to say why. You just have to say that's what it is. All right. Any questions on that? Okay. So once we've got those, I think that's pretty easy. You've got it narrowed down. You identify those. All right, again, the next part is the operational definition. So they will tell you what they want an operational definition of. So let's say, they say, describe the operational definition of depression in this study. Well, you could say the operational depression is how they scored on a survey of 1 to 10 of how happy they felt after listening to Taylor Swift songs. That could be the operational definition. But usually there's a number involved, or usually there's something measurable. But how are they measuring whatever it is? What is the operational definition of sleep? Or a school start time. The operational definition of a school start time is what time students arrive and the first bell rings when they get to school. That could be an operational definition. So be clear and you're quantifying it. The identified statistic one. So this one, it helps to do a definition even if it doesn't actually require it. So let's say they ask, what is the meaning of the mean for hours of sleep in this study? So you could say the meaning of mean is the total number of hours students slept divided by the number of students they studied. And in this study, this many students slept an average of 7 hours a night, whereas the kids who started school earlier slept an average of 5 hours a night. So say, what is that statistic? What does it mean? And then relate it to the study. So interpret or explain what the statistics are telling you. I think on one of the ones you just did, it was, what is the meaning of the standard deviation being 10? So the meaning of a standard deviation of 10 tells us that their scores, even though they had the same average, were very far apart. That some scores were very high and some scores were very low. For example, George's score on this was a 78 and Fred's score was a 23. That's high standard deviation. So you're saying what it is and then relating it to the data that's in the study. You're going to do this, and then we will actually break down the ones that you do while you're practicing while I'm gone. All right, the next one, the ethical guidelines. So again, it's what is in the research, in the article. So informed consent, informed assent, that's if there's children there. Protection from harm. Remember, if it says to keep them from being too distressed, they limited the amount of time that they were participating in the study. That could be an ethical thing, that if they're trying to make it easier on the participants, that's an ethical guideline, that they protected them from harm by limiting the amount of time they had to listen to the fire alarm or whatever it was. Confidentiality and anonymity. You could say everybody was sent their scores separately. That could be that they protected their personal information. So it may not actually say those words, but it may be something they did, that they had to click that they agreed to participate in the study. That's informed consent. So then no deception, and if there was deception, that they debriefed them. Any questions on any of the ethical guidelines? All right, the next one, the generalizable part. So again, remember, generalizable means that it can be, that information can be used with a broader population. And you can say yes or you can say no. The things that you're looking for are the characteristics of who was in the study. Were they old? Were they young? Were they men? Were they women? Were they educated? Uneducated? Were they all in Texas? Were they all over the country? So you can use that information. So if the study only included women, you could say this study is not generalizable because it only included women. So it cannot be generalized to all the whole adult population. It can only be generalized to other women. This study was given to adult women, so it could be generalized to adult women in other states. So you can generalize it or not. You pick. Don't just pick, this is one of the things I've talked about in my college board groups, don't just pick based on the quantity of people. So it's possible they could ask about a case study. A case study, we know by definition is generally not generalizable. But don't just say that because there's not many people. So let's say the case study is over serial killers. Don't just say this is not generalizable because there's only like 20 serial killers. If you were going to say that, you'd say this is not generalizable to the general population because not everybody has all committed crimes. Or you could say this is generalizable, but only to other people who have also committed severe crimes. So don't just say there weren't that many people in the study. Like, talk about their characteristics. Any questions on generalizability? Again, you can go either way. You just have to say why or why not. A lot of times people lose points because they don't do the why or why not. And don't pick both. Don't write that it is and it isn't generalizable. Pick one and go for it.
Okay.
The last one is this hypothesis one. This is very similar to what you're doing in the EBQ. So you're saying, explain how at least one of the research findings supports or refutes the psychological concept or hypothesis in the study. So you would say the hypothesis is, whatever they're saying, that starting school at a later hour will lead to better academic scores because the study shows, so it supports that. The hypothesis supports the idea that school should start later because the students who slept later did better on these 3 tests. And then describe that a little bit more. So this is like the other one, the EBQ, except you don't have to make up the evidence, it's there. So, and you don't have to come up with a random psych concept. You're picking information that's already in there. So you're saying, yes, it's supported, or maybe no, it's not supported, it's refuted. That one's better to just talk about when we're looking at one. So, any questions on those? All right, I talked, I think, a little bit longer than I did in my other class. All right.